Hi.
Hello.
Sorry, I'm just getting this sorted. This is my first time going on a live.
I see.
How's your day been so far? Good? Good.
It's been good. How about yours?
Good, actually. Just general, doing work, doing my cooking, all that sort of stuff. So
Yes.
It's good to have you here. I'm just going to wait for a few more people. Hopefully, I don't
You
know.
can probably pin the topic we're talking about today in the comment section, if you know how to do that.
Yes, I'm going to figure out how to do that. I'm going to have to do that. I should probably
Maybe Shreya can come in or tell you on WhatsApp how to do it.
Yes, let me just do that.
Yeah. So for anyone who's joining us, please stick around. We're about to talk about...
Oh, yeah, sorry. We're going to be talking about intimate partner violence. We're talking about, especially in queer relationships. So one second, I'm just trying to sort this out.
It's okay. I'm just going to join you back in like a moment. I'm going to lower the fan intensity.
Yeah, sure. Pin your comments if I know where the comment is. Creatify. There we
Great.
go.
You've written it? No. Shreya's written it, but it's not been pinned.
There we go. Now I have
Oh, great.
this came out on my screen.
Amazing.
Perfect.
Good job for the first time. I mean, first Insta Live, you're acing it already.
Trying my best. All right, so today's discussion is about intimate partner violence in the LGBTQI communities, and this is usually a bit of a tricky topic because, not tricky per se, but it's mostly the fact that people don't talk about it, especially considering the queer community is already quite marginalized, and
they don't think about it.
Yeah, it's not part of their consciousness.
Yeah, when we say people, we have a different image. When we say women, we imagine cis women and not trans. So our brain doesn't go there. That's why we have to do these sessions to make someone be like, hey, expand the scope, please.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the things that I find, most people think about, intimate partner violence in terms of heterosexual relationships, but most people seem to not know that intimate partner violence exists within the queer community in a disproportionate amount, actually. And the fact that they also go through something called, I don't know what happened. They go through something called like a double closet phenomenon where they don't even want to talk about it. They don't want to, because they don't want to report it, because if they report it, they might get outed, or it might even cause further stigma into the community, which is something that they also want to avoid. But yeah. Please talk about that.
So I guess it's very important to kind of prime our viewers into first LGBTQIA+.
Yeah.
So L is lesbian, G is gay, B is bisexual, T is transgender, Q is questioning or queer, I stands for intersex, A is for asexual, and plus means other identities that are in minority or marginalized because of their sexual orientation or gender identity.
Yeah.
So I'm a counseling psychologist and I identify as lesbian as well. And I'm also a performer and I work in creating safe spaces for the queer communities as well as allies. Ally is anybody who supports, is a straight person, but who supports the queer movement that is there to get our rights, our civil rights. So as a person, when I decided to come out, I was also leaving my certain civil rights, such as those, the ability to marry a same-sex partner. India doesn't have legalized non-heterosexual unions, or I can't get a health insurance or a life insurance, and there can be property inheritance issues with my same-sex partners. So we have to understand like a bit about, okay, why is LGBT clubbed together and called a community? That's because we experience similar stresses and a similar culture. We feel more safe amongst our people. But today we're talking about when we don't feel safe amongst our own people or community. And in this specifically today, when we talk about this, I want to again further identify two groups within LGBT. So we'll talk about LGB in one way, because their experiences are very similar. And then we're going to talk about TGNC together, which is transgender and non-conforming people, because their set of issues are going to vary, and how one can intervene also varies.
Yes.
Yeah.
Actually, I have to introduce you. I know you kind of introduced yourself a little bit more, but I'm just going to quickly introduce you. Yes. So, Divya Dureja is a renowned counseling psychologist, a mental health and sexuality educator, an international spoken word poet, a creative strategies consultant, and an events curator and a presenter delving in the themes of feminism, queer identity, freedom, sexuality, liberty, power, and autonomy. So from working on community development projects in semi-rural areas in India to gaining experience in communications at the International Gay and Lesbian Human Rights Commission in New York City, she has done it all. And as a poet, she has performed with poets such as Sarah Kay and Deborah Emanuel, and her own ensemble, the Divya Dureja Project. She co-founded Performers Consortium, and it's a safe platform for LGBTQ plus performers, and created a poetry film on vaginismus, which has received a appreciation from around the globe. So her continued success in the sphere of mental health curation, her ventures in the nightlife for LGBTQIA, fascinating, folks, and her versatility in performance, poet, definitive of her multidisciplinary approach to art, activism, and wellness. So,
this is very similar to when somebody sings happy birthday to you and you don't know what to do.
I know. But I still have to. I really do have to.
I know.
I forgot to do that. But yeah, so now you said that you were going to talk about the LGBT, the lesbian, gay, bisexual.
Bisexual.
Yeah.
And TGNC separately, because the risk factors in IPV, intimate partner violence, and the way to approach or intervention would differ.
Yeah.
Shall we just jump into it?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So
okay.
We're just going to talk about. Let's start with the LGBT community first and see how the differences are.
So I'd be able to kind of go at like a topic but together. So for example, let's look at firstly what would be the risk factors of IPV in the LGBTQI community. So firstly, let's understand that a transgender or gender non-conforming person is at double the risk of facing violence in public spaces than an LGB person, because they are visibly queer. Okay, so we have to look at that factor. Bisexual people tend to be more susceptible to IPV or experience such sexual violence when they are in their hetero passing relationship. Right. And again, then you have to look at, say, in outside countries, it's whether they are person of color or which ethnicity they belong to. In India, we have to look at caste, class, socioeconomic. So again, the other factors that add on to the layers of them being a minority. Okay, so everybody's dealt with different cards. Another thing we have to look at is that TGNC people, most of them, tend to face homelessness and abandonment at an earlier age, would have probably gone through public bullying, and would, in most cases, would not have completed their education, and their psychosocial development would not have been in a very confident manner during their childhood, and they may carry a lot of internalized trauma. So keeping all this in mind, then imagine that we are approaching the LGBTQ relationship. So now there are two kinds, right? So there's a same-sex couple, and then there is transsexual couples. Right. So, for example, we have trans couples where you've recently seen there's a person in news. It's a couple in Spain, I believe, or even closer home in India. We have certain couples where the trans man. So trans man stands for transitioned to man. right? So a person who was born as a female felt their gender identity was not in congruence with their biological sex, and so they underwent a transition. Could be surgical, could be also just self-identification and not surgical intervention. And so they are so if a trans woman is in a relationship with a trans man, it's a transsexual couple. So that means they are then heterosexual in a way, because they're liking the person of opposite sex. So again, when we go deeper into terminologies, it gets a little tricky to define, okay, what is this couple? Do we call them a trans couple because they both had trans identities, or do we call them a heterosexual couple because now they've assumed those roles, right? But the reason why in this conversation we have to call them trans couple is because we have to take cognizance of that identity and how it plays out in IPV. So one major concern when intimate partner violence happens, usually when, say, violence even is perpetrated against quote unquote weaker sex, which would be cis women, or so it's presumed, or even from men on other men, whoever is thought of being a weaker link. So that's the mindset, that this person won't revolt, or I can abuse this person. And this could be a child, this could be a grown-up person. The specific thing why it's difficult to report intimate partner violence in LGB and TGNC, LGBTQ relationship, is the fear of outing, right? So many people are not out to their own families. And so we don't know if we go to the police, it'll become a police case, and we don't know how to handle that, right? So they don't go and report. The other could be fear of being judged and not knowing the legal laws and privileges they have on their own, because they actually don't have any privileges, right? The other could be the disclosing of this intimate partner violence will further stigmatize relationships in LGBTQI community कि ये तो abnormal है, ये सही नहीं है, ये तो कुछ गड़बड़ है इनमें. So it will further, instead of them showing empathy, they will further put you in another stereotype. And secondly, the fear of being judged as your relationship is inferior and doesn't require our intervention. Because sadly, sometimes authorities are not sensitized enough to handle such situations, right? So we have to first understand the detriments of why IPV actually happens but isn't reported. Now, in case, for example, intimate partner violence in LGBTQI couples is reported, we have to kind of understand if you are the clinical history taker, abuse is abuse. You have to go through the protocol you would in any case. But here would come a question, say if you're with a transgender non-conforming person, it's okay for you to ask what is your preferred pronoun and not misgender them. But it could be that legally they haven't gotten things changed on their document. But because in a clinical process where you need to know unki health insurance hai ya nahi and things like that, you may have to ask. And if you feel discomfort in asking this, the person in front of you feel discomfort and they will not feel like disclosing things. So it's okay to move past that and be like, you know what, I'm sorry if you accidentally call them by misgender them, or if you need to ask such questions, just go about it. You can still show empathy and concern in a lot of other ways, and that person will get it. So don't just kind of get fixated on that. Then while you're taking assessment, which you will anyway do with a person who from a heterosexual relationship, here you have to further ask about, instead of just putting them, okay, when a person comes to you in an LGB relationship or a TGNC relationship, because we are used to seeing the cis man hitting the cis woman, we assume the muscle or the more masculine person would be the perpetrator. That is not the scenario. A lesbian relationship, the dynamics are different. In a gay relationship, the dynamics are different. In a TGNC relationship, the dynamics are very different. Yeah. So don't assume it's the more masculine looking person who is the perpetrator. At this point, you need to use your non-verbal body languages and communication. You need to ask about, both the person's current feelings and reactions. You need to inquire, find things like, oh, who is the decision maker in the relationship? Instead of asking who wears the pants, you ask who is the decision maker in relationship. That could go from some things like who's handling the finances to who's deciding cooking or where to sleep, where to get settled, and things like that. So it's important for you to understand the dynamic, and it's not so black and white, or don't assume things. And then, so if you've already used inclusive and non-judgmental language with such a person, and you've tried to understand the relationship dynamics, the decision-making dynamics, then comes a time, where you may have to meet another partner, right? In those situations also, don't end up assuming a lot of things. Sometimes one person may say, okay, this person's gaslighting me in a same-sex relationship, and you might believe them. But when you end up meeting the other person, it could be this abuser that's putting that thing on the other person. So please use your judgment in a very, very informed and clever manner. Because it's difficult to kind of identify those areas in a same-sex relationship. And then comes safety planning. So we all talk about this to people who are getting abused or find themselves in unsafe environments. So the thing is, just as you would sit with a heterosexual couple and help them with safety planning. So for example, knowing when the next violent incident is about to happen and what would be the safe go-to areas, having a bag ready, all those things you plan with this person. But it could be that this person doesn't have support systems. They could have been stigmatized by their own community or by their friends and family. They might require extraction in a different way from their place. They might, if it's a transgender non-conforming person, their bag, safety bag also might need to include their hormone treatment and their medicines, different size clothing, because they could be in the process of transitioning. It is also important to identify what safe places could be like for this person. What you might think might be a safe place for extraction of a straight person would not be a safe place for extraction of a queer person. So the safety planning will have to take into account, and also you may have to speak to lawyers who particularly work with queer clients, or shelter homes or NGOs or gharanas who would have understood or already been part of such a resource building space or intervention space. So it is also essential that as a person who's intervening, either a friend or a medical practitioner or a psychologist, it is important to connect this person to the specific community support that is there. There are a lot of people I knew. I got a call some years back from a couple. They were in their 30s and they'd both been living in Delhi, and their hometowns were some other states of India. And at this point, the parents had gotten to know these two girls were living together. And these are consensual relationship, adult women with their own jobs, living in their own rental space in the capital of India. Okay. And their parents said, we're going to come and we're going to take charge of this and we're going to pull you guys apart. And they were so shit scared. And none of them were out to their friends or at the workplace. And they were living in their own little cocoon, and they'd never been in touch with any community support. Somehow she had seen a video of mine, she felt she could talk to me, and she said, hey, help me out. What do I do? And it's at that point that, of course, I introduced her to the community support. But turns out, when I dug deeper, there are certain sections in the IPC. Now, we know Section 377 is gone. But there are sections in the IPC that are still being misused and are targeted to further discriminate against lesbian and trans couples. So there are certain sections in the IPC that allow a family to intervene and pull the people apart, saying that one person has abducted the other person. Or there are certain laws that exist, which I talked about in my TED talk, which I would urge somebody to see to understand what are the ways the stress that this LGBTQ minority feels, and the way we can be good allies and intervene, and what are the laws still being misused, and we need to work in that direction. So, which is why I said, when you do think of community support, you could end up having a couple like this who literally has isolated themselves so much. This time the perpetrator was family. That could also be a situation. But it could be double-edged sword. The family is also not there, and their partner violence is there, and they've isolated themselves. Then it gets doubly difficult, right? Also, what we can do, like a Sakshi.org, right? Rakshan project, you can take initiatives to make inclusive materials and increase visibility. So your material, your resources can include a section on intimate partner violence in the LGBTQI community, and resources that are specified in that regard, to that population. Also, mental health practitioners who practice queer affirmative counseling procedures and practices and therapies, and kind of create a resource pool specifically in that direction. Because understand that a marginalized community or member would need more support and understanding in that regard. So yeah, I think I've covered up what I kind of wanted to give, like an overview of what this is about.
Just to quickly plug in, I did watch that TED Talk of yours. It was called Stigma of the LGBTQ.
Yeah, that wasn't how the title was supposed to be, but yeah.
I don't think usually people can decide what their titles are.
Oh yeah. I had full control. I sent them my bio and everything, but nothing like that got put, because don't get me in it. But
but just to plug in for our viewers, it's called Stigma of LGBTQ. That is on YouTube, so you can watch Divya talk about the marginalization that queer communities face in India. But yeah, we also talked about minority stress, right? We want to talk about, and I think it's really important to talk about the fact that most people seem to not think that, if you're a part of a marginalized community, I think there's a common misconception that if you are part of a queer community or of a marginalized community, and this is also applicable to like Dalit folks as well, that they are somehow given special provisions in the law, and that is literally the opposite of what is happening. So how about we talk about that a little bit more, and how that marginalization affects their stress levels.
Okay. So you've used the word minority stress.
Yeah.
You might feel stress as a word is actually not bad. Okay. In psychology, we're taught stress is basically serves as an impetus to get us to be productive. So if we didn't have a deadline or that optimum amount of stress, we won't work.
Yeah.
What is actually bad is when stress or eustress is the good amount of stress that keeps us productive.
Yeah.
But there comes a point where we feel and we say, I'm trying to cope.
Yeah.
Post that stage comes a stage where you've just either you've developed low mood, or you've fallen in the clutches of depression, or something bad's happened and you're just not functioning the way you used to. That's the state of distress, right? Now, everybody experiences this, but the minority of LGBTQI community, and we're going to put it together because there are certain things that are similar, certain will be different for transgenders, transgender people, would be, so let's understand. So something as simple as everybody assumes you're straight until you tell them otherwise.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
So now there's this thing called coming out.
Yeah.
There's a coming out process.
Yeah.
Now what that does is it poses stress and anxiety. But why? Because suddenly, first you have to identify with realizing, hey, I am different. And if I am different, am I the only one? Then it's like trying to resolve this identity confusion, right? It's about keeping something inside of yourself. And we know catharsis helps, and when you have to keep everything inside yourself, it can lead to rumination of thoughts or overthinking.
Yeah.
Then comes a stage where you start to think, if I am different, I am not normal, which is again, sadly, was only our diagnostic tools changed in 90s regarding this. So even a clinician would think, yes, you're abnormal, right? What you're feeling is not okay.
Yeah.
So you get aware that, hey, my life script is not what my parents or my family or society expects of me. That I will grow up, I'll have a baby and a straight marriage and job and everything. For me also, that for those 2 years when I was closeted, I was just trying to deal with the fact that my life script is not going to be the way my mother assumes it to be, or the way I assume it to be.
Yeah.
So imagine the number of stresses that you're feeling. On top of that, it could be that there are these laws that are misused against a person like me, right? Then it could be, what if I am made disinherited from my family? What if I am abandoned by my family? What if I don't have certain privileges which I used to have? So all of this, imagine, stress level is growing and growing. All of this will lead to what? It turns into distress, and it may lead to low mood, which may then turn into depression. It will also may lead to anxiety. And how do you, and when you can't even talk about it, or you don't have the resources, you can't go to a mental health practitioner, you can't speak to someone about it, you will try to numb yourself. How? Yeah. That's where the substances come in.
Yeah. Yeah.
So substance use is when you use a certain quantity. Abuse is when you've gone beyond the moderated amount. And so why do we use substance? You must see people who get stressed and then smoke. So it becomes a stress reaction, right? It's our brain, our pleasure center seeking temporary relief. Yeah. And we all know how substances work. To receive the same amount of relief, you have to take double the amount. And that's why it becomes a chain reaction. So we've got a person now who is trying, already in the clutches of, say, anxiety, depression, and substance abuse. And of course, their confidence is down, they don't have a support system, or in their head, they don't think they'll be accepted, or they might have to face a lot of otherness. And that's when suicidal ideation, self-harm begins, and maybe even a suicide attempt. So these are the 4 most prevalent mental illnesses or distress reactions that happen with the LGBTQI minority. And of course, it's going to differ. How many, like I said, which socioeconomic factor you belong to, which caste, class, identity, what are those multiple layers? Because we all have multiple identities within us. And some may make us give us a minority status, some may not give us a minority status, right? So it's a very complex balance. So that's why when you are counseling such a person, you have to understand where they're coming from. And so this is being carried on into the intimate partner violence relationship. So if a person has faced so many stresses and they've not been able to develop healthy mechanisms, or have not taken therapy, or have not got their right support systems, or their needs haven't been met, or their language of love, of safety, security, and other needs is very disillusioned, then they tend to attract or become the sources for a person who has the intention of bullying, will get to know that this person would be a match for me. Yeah. You know, it is kind of meant like that. When you observe these dynamics, when the clients come to you, it is mostly one person who believes somewhere on the inside that maybe I deserve this trauma, or I don't know how to get out of this, but they also love me. There are a lot of buts and ifs that go on, which are going to be similar in say, heterosexual couple and non-heterosexual couple. But what differs here is the experiences they may have gone through, the stresses they may have gone through, or how they have seen that the society never helps me, or I am all alone. How that feeling is exacerbated in a queer person would be different.
You know, when I thought, you know, when I came out as queer myself, I was thinking, I think that's it. It's going to be done and over and dusted. And then when I realized that it was a process where I'm going to have to be coming out for the rest of my life.
Yeah, it's not a one-time process. It's a constant.
No. And then on top of that, even when you come out to some people, they almost kind of do this thing where they want to negotiate with your identity. Like, are you sure you're queer? Are you sure this is a thing that's happening to you? And it's almost like a situation where you have to continue to like try and, you know, make them understand that this is your humanity, that I think this is something I know about, but then it's almost like this constant process where they're trying to push you back into a heteronormative, into a heteronormative context, which is rather puzzling. And I think many people do not understand how much that
Yeah.
how much, how marginalized and how alienating that is, and how isolating that is. My
Yeah.
experiences especially was with white queer folks. It was a bit of a bizarre experience, because I would be like, this is a racist space, but apparently this is queer. Okay,
Yeah.
great. Not
Yeah.
particularly a fan here. I think I'm going to bounce. But
Yeah.
I think one of the things that I find really important for queer folks is finding that community and that safe space for community. But unfortunately, that community we actually kind of see is kind of dwindling, or that they're being pushed into pockets of society, various pockets, and very, like, we're not able to find it as easily as is. Why is that?
So that was my concern when I was in New York, and I understood the dynamics are very different there in terms of POC and white folks, and the fact that there are some really good human beings who realize their privileges and use that space to further make them more inclusive. So coming to like your experience, and thank you for sharing that. So for LGBTQI safe spaces, when I was coming out, it was in the Section 377 had been recriminalized, right? So the only places I could interact with queer folks was at dharnas and protest march, or like really serious places. And I understood that this is the need of the art, but what that was further doing to me was further reinforcing that we are othered, we have so many issues, we don't have rights. And I realized that that's not a nice space to actually be like, hey, but like I want a girlfriend really badly, like I'm coming out and I want lightheartedness, like I don't want trauma bonding.
That's
So
exactly right. Yeah, no.
you get me. So
My first interaction, like my first interaction when I left a extremely homophobic country, that was Middle East. So
okay.
So no mention of being queer. So when I first when I moved around, that's when I realized okay, this is a place.
Yes, Pranav, Narula, we are lesbians, and we'd prefer if you look at that as a wonderful thing and respect us. Okay, let's continue.
That's yeah, but most of the time when I met the first time I was able to actually interact with queer folks in a community, it was always at protest spaces, and they were already discussing issues in a manner that already felt like, oh, great, I don't know if I can interact just yet, but at the same time, I want to interact with all of you because I don't know, I want to get with all of you. It's such a difficult thing, but yes, please continue.
So that's why I realized that when I would have clients coming to me, they would not be okay. It's very important to create LGBTQI safe spaces, and I'm the curator, and I've made a gender neutral toilets. I've made it safe. I have bouncers. There's no ID checking. It's a very good environment. I've got a queer DJ. I've taken care of every aspect, and I interact with everyone. At that time, what I'm ensuring is that if there is somebody who wants to kind of talk and say, hey, I am under distress, they know I'm a counseling psychologist. So at that time, they can also approach me, or things like that can happen. The other thing happened when clients were coming to me separately, they were sad and depressed because they couldn't interact with other queer people, and Tinder and other websites are basically very on the face value, like, hey, you're either good looking or not. So we couldn't harbor friendships. And there wasn't any place where I could be like, us and them nahi karna hai. LGBTQ allies chahiye. Allies are our biggest strength. Allies, we want you to join the protest marches. We want you to be there because, say, a movie like Ek Ladki Ko Dekha To Aisa Laga. Rajkumar Rao is the ally, and this movie is written by Ghazal Dalewal, who is herself a trans person who so boldly came on Satyamev Jayate. So it's blurring those lines, and that support that we need. So that's why it's important to create such safe spaces. All spaces have prevalence. That's what New York made me realize. An LGBTQ club is important. So is an LGBT community center. So is the UN work. So is a shelter home. Everything is important and is needed there's a purpose to everything. Just like there is for straight folks. We at least need 2 clubs in Delhi for the thousands that there are, So there is like literally no competition. You can do whatever at each night and kind of create these spaces. But again, a person who is, say, not out would be like, how can I come to these spaces? That's when I have to think of all angles, right? So I'm like, there are going to be masks there. Even if you want, you can just wear those masks and interact. You don't want photography, just wear the mask or say, I don't want photography. So we make provisions which a person coming from a heterosexual space would not understand. What other stresses and fears being carried by such a person?
I think it's just not very prevalent.
So yeah, in psychotherapy, that's why trauma-informed approaches or complex PTSD need to have their own zone when it comes to intimate partner violence in queer relationships, and further breaking down queer relationship and understanding what are the dynamics and what this person's life script has been thus far.
I think it's also because it's compounded by the fact that there's marginalization within the home.
Compounded marginalities.
Yes, and it's so hard to figure out whether the home is not safe. So social structures outside are not safe. They're not friendly. Yeah. They're not including when we talk, like, same thing when we talk about, like, the same way we talk about disabled folks and how you know, our infrastructure is literally just so hostile to them. Most people do not seem to apply that concept. You know, I don't.
And you have queer and disabled folks in the community. So when we're planning the Pride March, we have to look at, okay, do we have a tuk-tuk there? Do we have a sign language interpreter? So I know a bit of sign language, and I make sure that my parties have a sign language interpreter. So I have their ramp. Do they have a ramp? So things like that really have to be taken into account. And only when we, sadly, when we have stepped into the minority status, do we really then go dig deeper and understand, ye bhi is something we have to care about. When you're sitting at a privileged position, it's very difficult for you to step in those shoes and imagine that. So that's what I try to do with my workshops with students. I take them through situation exercises. Because they are going to be our future therapists and activists and corporate policy makers, right? So, and lawyers. So they need to kind of understand the context of being in somebody's shoes and imagining all these scenarios. Something as simple as if they're straight, their wedding photo in their, their chamber could act as a trigger point for a queer client coming in who doesn't have those rights, right? So you have to imagine. So talking about intimate partner violence during the lockdown, because that is our main concern right now. So somebody, say in Mumbai, was facing intimate partner violence from their partner. And this is a gay couple. Now they were not out, so they could not complain to the police. That option is out. So now comes friends support. Luckily, they still had family, but families in the city, but separate ways. They said, okay, come back to us. But because of the lockdown, you couldn't have movement, right? So then we had to think, okay, who has passes? Journalists and doctors. Whom can we reach out for the extraction process? When can we extract? How can we extract? Is this person also emotionally ready to extract? It has to come from the person, na ki haan, help me get out of here. वो एक realization के बिना we can't just jump in and be like नहीं तुम्हें बाहर निकालना है. So the complexity has to be taken into account. Similarly, I know we're talking about intimate partner violence, but we also have to think about queer kids who are living in homes where they are being misgendered right now, or they don't have access to their hormone therapy treatment and they're midway somehow, or those whose parents know that they're queer or they've taken away their phone or are physically abusing them. So all these cases have come across. So, but intimate partner violence is nuanced in a certain way because it's got a completely different dynamic of love present there and attachment style present there. And some sense of bonding that isn't
same with
fruitful.
Sorry, it's not the same with heterosexual relationships as to why, when we have the question about why don't heterosexual women leave their partners, it's not the same dynamic for their communities. And so I think that's also another interrogation. I mean, there's already little...
There's also intimate partner violence in the queer community. Say there's one queer person who's very famous or activist or is known for helping out others. But on the inside, they're very brutal to their partner. And this partner, when they speak up, this person shuts them out or say their identity, just as we've seen in the Me Too movement, these very upstanding individuals, but they're actually perpetrating partner violence. This is present even in the queer community. There is a case like that I've kind of helped out with. So it's very it's the same dynamics, but you have to understand that this person at that time, sometimes people in the queer community misuse their queer status, and that's why I'm saying it further stigmatizes queer community, saying, but I'm also a minority, how can you say I will do this to you? They hold on to it as a clutch. You won't think that happening. A cis man can't say, I'm also a minority when he's perpetrating. But in queer relationship, the woman can say, I'm minority, why would I hit you? So the reasoning and actually it's like, there used to be a show on Star World, no? Catch Me If You Can, or Lying Wala. So here you have to really, I don't remember the name.
I don't
but it's here you have to really take the case history and look at the verbal, non-verbal body language deeply.
Mm-hmm. I think like one of the other, it's because of the basic, it's also part of that patriarchal conception about women who are not, they're incapable of violence, and men are very much capable of fighting back against violence. And so it's the same concept that just exists in queer communities. So why isn't this happening?
But, or the butch-looking person would be the violence perpetrator.
Yes.
And for those who don't know what butch is the more we have terms within the queer community. Lesbians have femme, studs, butch.
Yes.
So butch is somebody who is more on the masculine side. Femme is someone like me. What is your? I think you're a stud. STEM. Or femme.
I'm actually genderqueer, so I tend to
genderqueer. Okay. Everywhere. Exactly. See, you've got two people who have like their own identifications. Again, you would wonder, why are we further like categorizing, labeling ourselves? It's not very like, we're not very serious about it, but it's a way for us to know, like, I know if I prefer more femme women, or I'm usually attracted to whom. So just like you have attraction to a man and not every walking man, it's same here. We'll have attraction to a particular individual.
Yeah, there's also the conception that butch women do not like butch women, and that's also, oh god, and I'm like, no, let's not even go there. Have you seen femme relationships?
Yeah.
But so that's also another part of it, right? Because femme relationships are also cannot be abusive because they both apparently have more feminine characteristics, and that's also extremely strange, and it all stems back to this idea of what women and femininity are. It's all based on that horrible, stupid idea on cis women's identity, and that is projected to a lot of
same-sex and transsexual couples.
Yeah, they just think that the same logic applies, and we just go, how is that even possible to even begin with? I mean, queer communities over here is not the same in any other country. There are similarities. Maybe.
So we have to also look at the fact that, say in India, we have about 26 different kinds of third gender or transgender community, right? So there's Skinner, there's Koti, there's so many different terminologies. Just as our language changes after kilometers, the nuances changes. And you also might think, rural spaces are worse than urban spaces. No, there is no myth like that. The rural spaces tend to be more collectivistic and more understanding and gender fluid in nature. Men can wear nathani and skirts in certain places, whereas in that same state, the cities are more strictures. There are more strictures and are more. They shun people who don't adhere to a certain kind of norm. So we have to understand that within India, if we are to have IPV interventions for the LGBTQI community, we have to take into account that their literacy rate is going to be low. We have to understand they might have faced violence from the police. You might have to understand that they may not have family support. We might have to understand they may need counselors in their state language and not English or Hindi. We might have to take into account their adverse childhood experiences as part of their trauma therapy, right? So we may need different modalities when it comes to therapeutic intervention in such a space. And they may have faced bullying at the hands of the police or the authorities. And so they will probably not reach out to them for support. So you have to always give them that shield along with a lawyer and a police personnel who's kind of is already sensitized to come into their case, to make them understand this is a safe space. So that is going to take time, and it's going to have a different path than it would say with a heterosexual woman who is also being helped out of this space. Today, we're not trying to say like, nahi, nahi. In LGBTQI का ज़्यादा वो होता है versus a cis woman. We're not saying anything like that. We're only trying to say there are going to be different factors that one has to take cognizance of while intervening and taking them from point A to point B.
Yeah. I think one of the things that I'm always concerned about as a queer person is if I don't actually really, I come from a school of thought where we believe prison abolition and police abolition is one of the main concerns, because we do not believe that the police are equipped, nor are they interested in solving or even helping, like in assisting with intimate partner violence. And this is especially true for a lot of queer folks who are part of political struggles as well for liberation. And so how, like, when we try to figure out, when we imagine communities of accountability, you know, and how do we, that obstacle for creating communities, it seems like it's a long way to go, especially when we come to conversations about, you know, prison abolition or police abolition. What is that we want to see in India?
So that's where you and I, or people in this community, so I not only take client sessions or create safe spaces, I'm trying to access as many spaces where I see a gap, right?
Yeah.
So I am doing diversity and inclusion in corporates, with teachers, with students, with parents, right? Primary school teachers, to change their language and understanding of kids so they're able to create a more gender inclusive environment. Okay. On top of that, say a Bihar police needs to be sensitized on gender and sexuality training. So that project was supposed to happen before COVID happened. So we need to get to the source. Right? So when it's very easy to say कि हाँ ये support systems हैं, but अगर वो support systems ही flawed हैं, उनको पहले ठीक करना है. तभी तो person को लगेगा कि I can go seek support. So if I'm going to go to a Bihar police and train them and sensitize them, I'm going to make sure that the training module has pictographic or situation-based exercise where I make them empathize, get in somebody's shoes, and also understand these current laws that are being misused by families to target queer people, because they may not even think that way. When a parent comes in कि ये बच्चों को अलग करो, they have to understand they can't like intervene like this or be a tool for the patriarchy. They have to stop being a tool for patriarchy, right? That is the whole point of this sensitization. So we have to go at it. If somebody is holding a very strong belief and you try to say nahi ye galat hai, they will obviously react, they will obviously be offended, they will have the defenses up. So this is why in my trainings or in especially when it comes to stigmas, prejudice and discrimination, there's a completely different approach. You have to first understand their fringe beliefs. You have to find a way in. You have to develop some common ground. Are you there?
I'm so sorry. I lost electricity.
No worries.
And I just went on my 4G really quick. I'm
okay,
so sorry.
No worries. So I was saying, which is why it's so important for us to also know that it's one way to say it's not my duty to school you or to make you a better person, but sadly, because of our lived experience, the way we will make the resource material and the tools and the guidebooks or the manuals will be more inclusive. So we say take your own rest, but the idea, that's why we need allies. It's a snowball effect. I train 200 people in one go, they can then further spread it, right? So we need to develop this allyship and go ahead at it, because the people who will come to quote unquote rescue or help us in situations will not be queer, but they need to have an understanding of these dynamics.
And that's what makes it an appropriate allyship. I guess one of the things that always has bothered me is that, you know, any further criminalization of queer folks is something that we need to desperately avoid, considering even if that they are abusive partners as well. And that's another reason that we already do not want them inside bars. We do not want them anywhere near there. How do we have community accountability? Is there community spaces where other queer folks can come in and intervene? Are there de-escalation techniques to bring this idea through, so that we can intervene and try to actually literally appeal to the humanity of these abusers who are doing the abusing? And that is something that seems like a very distant idea, but it's something that we really need.
It is possible, especially in IPV. We are looking at law, right? So we have to make more inclusive law and policy. We're looking at police, so we have to look at sensitizing. We're looking at NGOs. We have to give them more support or CSR funding. Medical, so medical spaces, say post somebody who's had IPV. How do you go about not making them feel further alienated or stigmatized when you're taking their tests, right? Or if they say I was abused, and if they are HIV positive, you're not further stigmatizing them, right? Or so that entire process is where we have to come in and also sensitize doctors, nurses, paramedical staff. And also nobody knows any protocols in dealing with, say, a transgender individual who's gone through, a transsex couple that has had an incident of IPV. So humanity, respect and dignity has to be maintained while carrying out all these protocols, no matter the person's orientation or their gender identity. Till we don't reach that space, we have a lot of work to do. We can't shun the people who end up misgendering or don't know what to do. It's okay. It's a learning ladder. As long as anybody says, like, you know what, I acknowledge I don't know about this. Will you teach me? There are certain people in the activism space who go there and go like, you don't know all of this, so you're not a part of this. And I try to take a very different approach, which is like, I had to learn myself, and here is everything that I know for you to start off, you know. And we have to create a dialogue and not shun the other person. Otherwise, we will never have allies. We will never have an understanding.
I'm so sorry. I don't know what's going on with the connection. It was a little bit paused, but could you repeat the last bit?
I said we have to kind of develop an. Can somebody comment if you can still hear me? I can hear you. Can you hear me? I can hear you.
I'm sorry. Now I can hear you, but cool. Now I can hear you.
They heard both of us. Everybody's saying hi. Thank you.
Okay, if they heard both of us, it's just it's just lost connection for a little bit, and so it caused a bit of a lag. We were discussing about community accountability, but that's
and how we need to develop a positive dialogue and not shun the other person because of the fact that they don't know. And she's telling you your electricity has just come on. Natasha is telling. So.
Yeah, I know, but I use my 4G, but it should still be okay. But
she's saying switch to Wi-Fi if you want to.
No, I turned off my Wi-Fi immediately. But no, I think especially. I feel like, the discourse, internationally is a little bit different compared to over here. So I think we need to be a little bit more patient with trying to educate people or trying to, and I think it's hard because there's almost a reactionary response. Like, how do you not know about our pronouns? How do you not know about, how to...
That's what I do with all these young kids who come to my workshops. Sadly, they require like a bit of love, because they fostered so much hate. They've already got the defenses up, and I was like, mat karo. What you might think somebody's calling you as, you might think somebody's hating towards you, and you'll be like, "Arey, ye jana homophobic, ya queerphobic, ya transphobic." And I'm like, "Ek second, step back. How are you reflecting your personality? Are you a good human being? Are you kind? Are you empathetic? Or have you become so hardened that when they don't like you as your personality, you say, nahi, ye queerphobic hai." So we can't lose our inner selves. And the goodness that I've observed is whenever I've been kind and empathetic, now my identity is an integral part of me. But because of my other positive qualities, I've seen so many earlier people who weren't supportive of queer community completely have a 180-degree turn,
Yeah.
and that is I use the simple techniques of empathy and kindness and humanity, basically. And that makes the other person see you as a human also. And like, okay, if this person is like this, there's goodness in this. So that's what I wish that all of us also do. And if in IPV there is a person who is not good and is committing violence, that is okay, because that is what is going to happen. It's all around us. But just as you would take somebody under rehabilitation doesn't mean this person is a lost cause. It could be that they are acting out
Yeah.
because they have themselves only known the language of violence. We have to also understand that. So you need to be doubly careful in approaching this and understand, why is this person acting out. So in bullying, there is a person being bullied and the bully, and they're having different dynamics, and the pain is there. And of course, the people who are the bystanders will notice things. So we have to kind of see the role of all of these when it comes to IPV. And bystanders would be the allies, and we have to get them to speak up, or within the queer community to speak up and take a stand, and not be worried if there is one person who's very dominating or has a power position or privileged position within the queer community, and they can't speak out against that person. So each case is unique, but that's where we have to come in and understand the dynamics.
Yeah, one of the things that is an ardent belief of mine is that, especially when it comes to violent communities, is that most of the time there is a little bit of, general sense of anger towards an abuser, but at the same time, I feel like, abusers who do commit any kind of abuse, I think that's, they have lost their sense of humanity. They have they've been divorced from it, and that's one of the reasons why they've normalized violence in their life as an appropriate mechanism to deal with. Sorry.
We also have to then clinically diagnose, is this person sociopathic?
Yes.
Right? Sometimes they're emotionally muted. So again, a proper clinical assessment is very needed. And second thing would be internalized homophobia, that may make you act out to the other person. So you might show affection also, but beat them up also, right? That could be internalized homophobia at play. So now we know the Orlando shooting that happened, a person who had internalized homophobia, and then they went and shot people in the club. So this similar dynamic can work in the bedroom and in public space.